Welcome, everybody, to Radical Anthropology on International Women's Day. And when our Tuesday class falls on International Women's Day, we really want to have something special. And tonight's event is a very special lecture from Heide Goettner-Abend, um, who is a mother, a grandmother, and really can be understood as the pioneer and founder of the discipline of matriarchal studies. She has her magnum opus, Matriarchal Societies, book published in 2013. And she is telling us that this year is a second volume, The History of Matriarchal Societies, that we're all really looking forward to. And these books are compendiums of scholarship in the field. Heidi's been a visiting professor at the universities of Montreal and Innsbruck. She's led congresses on matriarchal studies early this century that really established the discipline. She's also been twice nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and that really is the first time that radical anthropology has had a Peace Prize nominee speaking to us. And in this world today, really looking at what's happening today with the horrifying events, I think we absolutely have to consider alternative visions of society's organization. So Heide is going to talk to us about modern matriarchal studies and matriarchal politics. Please.
Thank you, Camilla and Chris, for this kind invitation and this opportunity to speak to all of you. I feel much honored. Thank you so much. In my presentation today, I would like to answer three questions. First, what is modern matriarchal studies? Second, what is a matriarchy? And third, what means matriarchal politics? Now to the first point, what is modern matriarchal studies? Two notes at the beginning. The misinterpretation of the concept matriarchy as rule of mothers or women has led hundreds of scholars operating within the patriarchal framework to adhere to this fiction in their citations. Some even consider it good style to constantly parade this misconception like a mantra. Other scholars have combed through the historical and anthropological records with smug irony, searching for such societies and, of course, not finding any. This shows that the definition of matriarchy as rule of women is an empty one, which can neither be used nor cited. How is it possible to do scholarly work without ever having defined the area under discussion based on fact? The other fundamental question here is, how can anyone know anything with certainty about matriarchy, and how can one define it at all if the subject is pushed to the margins and buried in prejudices? What are the methods to redefine it based on empirical findings, not on ideology? Now some words to traditional matriarchal studies. Traditional matriarchal studies have existed for a long time in the German language realm, already beginning in 1861 with Johann Jakob Bachofen's work Das Mutterrecht, Mother Right. Just before that, 10 years before that, the anthropological field of matriarchal studies was initiated by Henry Louis Morgan. For more than a century, the discussion about mother right and matriarchy continued in both bourgeois conservative and Marxist leftist circles, especially with Friedrich Engels, but exclusively from a male perspective. In the process, the topic was used and misused from the most various viewpoints by philosophical schools and political movements. Astonishing in these various works on the topic mother right or matriarchy is the lack, despite good collection of material, the lack of a clear definition and a scientific foundation of this research area. The concept matriarchy remains so indistinct that nearly everyone would understand it in a different way. That omission has opened the gates for emotions and ideologies that have burdened this discussion from the very beginning. As a result, there are massive back projections of bourgeois patriarchal conditions onto early cultural history, similar to the projections in anthropology onto non-Western indigenous societies, a situation that makes many so-called research findings worthless. Now, modern matriarchal studies. A turning point is indicated by the beginning of modern matriarchal studies, a scientifically well-grounded field of study that has appeared over the past few decades and is rapidly undergoing further development. Through my own work in German since 1978, a definitional, methodological, and theoretical basis was created, without which this research could not achieve its wide-ranging goals. This task consists in creating an adequate representation of the matriarchal societal forms in all its enormous geographical and historical breadth. Providing it with a scientific definition providing it with a scientific foundation entails, first, formulating an empirically grounded, adequate definition of matriarchy, capable of grasping the basic characteristics of the societal form. Second, developing an explicit methodology able to discover and analyze all phenomena within this field of research. Third, developing a theoretical framework that can integrate a huge mass of material consistently, which exists, but is scattered and misunderstood until today, thereby grasping the vast scope of matriarchal societal forms systematically and with sensitivity. Now some comments to these three requirements. The first requirement for a scientific definition was fulfilled when I developed a structural definition for the field of research matriarchy. I made comparative studies of as many currently existing societies of this kind as possible in order to find their common denominators, not their specific, their many specific characteristics, their common denominators on the four societal levels: social, economic, political, and cultural. While doing this, I learned a lot from my indigenous friends from this kind of society, whom I was happy to meet at several opportunities. That is, the new definition of matriarchy was not produced in abstraction and thus projected onto the field of study. Instead, it was developed inductively, step by step, through analytical observation of these societies and through continued learning. I will present it soon here in this lecture. Now to the second requirement. At the moment, I'm planning a book on the methodology of modern matriarchal studies to fulfill the second requirement. I can state here in short that it rests on two pillars: a broad interdisciplinarity and a thorough criticism of ideology, which means always patriarchal ideology here. The third requirement, developing a theoretical framework, can also only briefly be mentioned here. But I want to show you what it includes. It includes an overview of previous studies in matriarchy, which is the traditional research in this field. It must be evaluated and criticized in regard to its deficiencies. And it includes an analysis and presentation of the still existent matriarchal societies worldwide, This is my starting point in the book, Matriarchal Studies. I try to do it here. This is an important part because an adequate definition of matriarchy can only be obtained by these examples. It cannot be found from history of cultures alone, because there we are only dealing with the remains and fragments of former societies, which is not sufficient for an overall picture. And it includes a revision of history of cultures based on the detailed knowledge of matriarchal societies gained by anthropology. This history is much longer than the 4,000 or 5,000 years of patriarchal history, and during its longest periods, women created culture and embodied the integral center of society. And it includes to solve the riddle of the rise and development of patriarchy. Here it has to be explained why patriarchal patterns emerge in different places, on different continents, at different times, and under different conditions. There's no uniform answer to this. It's a huge research task. The answers will be very different for the different regions of the world. And it includes the framework of the theoretical framework. It includes at last to give an analysis of the history of patriarchy. Until now, the history of patriarchy has been written down as a history of domination, as a history from the top. But there also exists the perspective of the history from the bottom. It is the history of women, of the lower classes, of the marginalized cultures and the subcultures, where many matriarchal elements have been maintained. It shows that patriarchy did not succeed in destroying the ancient and long matriarchal traditions on all continents. So far, the theoretical framework, what modern matriarchal studies all includes. Yeah, and all of this must be researched systematically within this theoretical framework. Now, my second point, what is the matriarchy? The answer to this question means to develop the new and adequate definition of matriarchy. It is a definition that brings the deep structure of this type of society to light. Therefore, I call it a structural definition. Now I start with that. On principle, matriarchies are egalitarian and mother-centered societies. They are based on maternal values, such as caretaking, nurturing, perfect mutuality, solving conflicts by negotiation, and active peace building. These values hold for everybody, for mothers and those who are not mothers, for women and men alike. That means matriarchal societies are consciously built upon maternal values and motherly work. They are on principle need-oriented and not power-oriented. Their precepts aim to meet everyone's needs with the greatest benefit. Thus, in matriarchies, mothering, which originates as a biological fact, is transformed into a cultural model. All of these societies, which still exist or existed until recently in Asia, Africa, the Americas, and the Pacific area, are gender egalitarian, and most of them are fully egalitarian. This means they have no hierarchies, classes, nor domination of one gender by the other. Now I would like to present the structural definition on the 4 levels of society. These are the common, I say it once again, these are the common denominators of this type of society, not specific forms. Specific forms have a great variety, but this is not the topic here. The topic are the common features that they have. So I start with the social level. At the social level, matriarchal societies are based on the clan and on the symbolic order of the mother. This also means maternal values as spiritual principles, one that humans take from nature. Mother Nature cares for all beings, how different they may be, says in Minangkabau. The same applies to matriarchies. The prototypical mother cares for all her children, embracing their diversity. Matriarchal people live together in large kinship groups, formed according to the principles of matrilineality and matrilocality. That means the people live together in the mother's house or close to it, and the clan's name, all inheritance and social status are passed on through the mother's line. These principles of matrilineality and matrilocality put mothers at the center. In this way, mothers guide their clans without ruling. By their system of common motherhood and perfect mutuality, they shape a society that sees itself as a big clan, where everybody symbolically is mother or sister or brother to everybody else. Following from this, matriarchies can be defined on the social level as non-hierarchical, horizontal societies of matrilineal kinship. This social order based on motherhood includes far-reaching consequences for the economic level. Matriarchal economy is a subsistence economy. There is no such thing as private property, and there are no territorial claims. The people simply have usage rights on the soil they till, and parcels of land are worked on communally. Most importantly, women have the power of disposition over goods and clan houses, and especially over the sources of nourishment, the fields and the small herds of animals. All the goods are put in the hands of the clan mother, and she distributes them equally among her children and grandchildren. She is responsible for the sustenance and protection of all clan members. Please allow me a short comment on the meta level. This distinction that the economy is in the hands of women is decisive to make a society a matriarchal one and differentiate it from a merely matrilineal one. In a merely matrilineal society, the economy is in the hands of men, which makes up a very different form of society. Until today, this distinction between matrilineal societies on one hand and matriarchal ones on the other has not been made in anthropology, which has caused much confusion. End of the comment on the meta level. Now I continue with the definition on economy. In a matriarchal community, the clans enjoy perfect mutuality. Every relative advantage or disadvantage in terms of acquiring goods is mediated by social guidelines. For example, at the seasonal festival of the agricultural year, clans that are comparatively better off will invite all the inhabitants to be their guests and give away their goods as gift to all their neighbors. Since this is the general attitude, matriarchal economy can be called a gift economy. It is the economic manifestation of the maternal values. And due to these features, matriarchies can be defined on the economic level as societies of economic mutuality based on the circulation of gifts. Now, the patterns of the political level. They also follow the principle of consensus, which means unanimity regarding each decision. To manifest a principle like this in practice, the society must be specifically organized to do so, and matrilineal kinship lines are once again the starting point. The basis of each decision-making is the individual clan house, where the people live. Speakers of the clan, in most of the cases men, meet together in the village council or regional council, but do not make decisions themselves. They simply communicate the decisions that have been made in their clan houses. These speakers move between the local council and the regional council until consensus of the village or the whole region is reached. In this way, a true grassroots democracy, as we could label it, is put into practice. This clearly shows how maternal values also permeate political practice. The result of this practice is that matriarchies can be defined on the political level as egalitarian societies of consensus. Now, the cultural level. Such a societal system as matriarchy could not function as a whole without a deep, supporting, and all-permeating spiritual attitude. At the cultural level, matriarchal people regard divinity as immanent, for the whole world is regarded as divine, as feminine divine. This is evident in the widely held concept of the universe as the great goddess who brought forth everything by birth, and of the earth as a great mother who created everything living. In such a culture, everything is spiritual and celebrated in elaborate ceremonies. There is no separation between sacred and secular. So even the everyday tasks also have ritual significance. Every social, economic, and political action is informed by the principle of encompassing maternal attitude and maternal values, which are spiritual principles. In this sense, matriarchal societies are sacred ones. On the spiritual level or cultural level, matriarchies can be defined as sacred societies and cultures of the divine feminine or goddess. I would like to mention just some societies of this kind. Also, I think you know them all very well, but I would like to mention them. In Asia, traditional matriarchal societies are the Khasi in northeast India, the Nayar in southwest India, the Mosoro in western China, whom I visited myself, and the Minangkabau of Sumatra, to name only some of Asia. There are many more. In Africa, traditional matriarchal societies are the Akan peoples in West Africa in their traditional culture, many of the Bantu peoples in Central Africa, and the Tuareg peoples in North Africa. Several or many of these cultures are in danger today and are also destroyed. In America, traditional matriarchal societies have been the 5 peoples of the Iroquois Confederation in the northeast of North America, the Hopi and Pueblo peoples of Arizona in the southwest of North America, and, for example, in South America, the Arawak peoples. There are several or many more, but I cannot mention them all here. With this knowledge about these existing matriarchal societies in mind, we can have a closer look on history of culture, and it will enable us to discover the long and rich history of matriarchies in the past. However, I do not want to go into historical details here, but will try to answer the third question, which refers to the present and the disastrous situation humankind finds itself involved today. I think this is really a topic for International Women's Day, matriarchal politics. What does it mean? Third point. It is becoming increasingly clear that we need a radically different cultural model on all levels of society than the destructive patriarchal patterns which bring humankind ever closer to the brink of extinction. The matriarchal model is radically different, and it has great significance for our future as women and mothers and of humankind in general. Therefore, matriarchal politics, which is based on modern matriarchal studies, provides many ideas and a vision for a new mother-centered, egalitarian and peaceful societies. That is, for modern matriarchal societies. Of course, we cannot imitate traditional matriarchal societies, but we can gain much stimulation and insights from them, which, unlike theoretical utopias, have been lived over millennia, a very stable form of society. Now, some ideas. On the social level, the lesson of matriarchies is to create and support groups and communities based on affinity, traditional or alternative new ones. These affinity communities, whose members feel as siblings by choice, form symbolic clans. The symbolic clan will become matriarchal if they are initiated and led by women, according to the needs of mothers and children, and not according to the power games of patriarchally influenced men. For motherhood is the most important function in each society. Economically, the lesson of matriarchies is to create new subsistence economies based on local and regional units. Subsistence communities work self-sufficiently and create circles of gift-giving. Mothers are the mainstays of these economic structures because these support best their families, and in many regions of the world, they still practice it. On the political level, the lesson is to adopt the matriarchal consensus principle, which is of utmost importance for egalitarian communities and an egalitarian society. To produce a true grassroots democracy in that way. This can only be practiced up to the regional level, but flourishing, independent, and self-sufficient regions are the political aim. Big nation states, state unions, and superpowers are superfluous. They are too big to practice transparent politics of consensus, and they are too small to be able to solve the problems of the damaged biosphere on Earth, the polluted soil, water, and air. So they are outdated. On the cultural level, matriarchal politics mean to leave all hierarchical, male-dominated religions with a claim to the absolute truth. Instead, the world is regarded as divine again, the mother of us all, and is treated with care and love. Everything in the world is respected as sacred. Matriarchal spirituality infuses everything as an inherent part of everyday life. From this, it is possible to develop a clear vision which might become a practical guideline to integrate different actions of different alternative movements to make them more powerful. Much of the political work which is done today by many alternative movements implicitly tends towards the matriarchal perspective given here. But we have to bring it to their minds so that they will start to cooperate. Yes, and now some key ideas how to make this possible in practical respect. The basic demand to make this possible is, according to my opinion, that the economy is given into the hands of women again. Or it should be at least a shared economy. We want to be modest, a shared economy. Why is that necessary? Let me talk in short about the women's situation of today. I quote a brief summary from the UN report on the situation of women worldwide. Women make up half of the world's population, work nearly 2/3 of all hours worked, receive 1/10 of worldwide income, and own less than 1/100th of world property. United Nations Report 1980. What a scandal that is. Yet no one seems to get worked up about it. But if women believe a lot has changed in the meantime, then they are mistaken. I quote from 2010. In 2010, the president of the UN Economic and Social Council cited the following figures. Women work 66 of all hours worked worldwide and produce 50% of the food. But they get 10% of the world income, own 1% of the property, and represent 60% of the world's poorest. UN press conference on June 2010. This was the situation in 2010, in 2020, and so on. The UN report on the situation of women worldwide is published annually, but nothing changes. We therefore demand a shared economy. That means a fair distribution of the world's income as expressed by the national wealth of each individual state. To put it short and clearly, the fundamental demand is 50% of all national wealth belongs to women and their projects. Equally shared economy in all its aspects. At present, working women pay the same taxes as men. Millions of mothers work free of charge, as well as other caring people. And working women everywhere earn much less than men. But 90% of the monetary flow pours into men's projects, military, transnational corporations, monumental prestige architecture, huge sports stadiums and events, and so on. I think this must come to an end. What would be the result of if this situation is changed? Let us imagine the results. If women would own half of the economy which belongs to them but is continuously stolen from them, they would no longer be beggars for their own projects. They could run their own cooperatives independently of male dominance, male values, and male worldviews. That means, economically, women set up local subsistence economies and cooperatives for themselves and their communities. Gardens, farms, their own stores, their own distributions, sharing and gifting of goods. Every extended family or symbolic matriarchal clan set up by women receives its own houses. Women's villages are established. They would include men who also embrace the maternal values. Socially, women establish new matriarchal communities related by blood or affinity with their affinity sisters and brothers. Their houses are multi-generational. Motherhood is collective. There is no more isolation of mothers in nuclear families, no social isolation of persons of any age group. Women start their own schools, colleges, cultural and technical academies, and universities in accordance with their own knowledge and values, sharing it with everybody. Women have their own medical facilities and their own healthcare. Politically, women are the organizers and keepers of the consensus principle in their communities or symbolic clans, and also organize it on the local and regional level. Practical bottom-up politics prevails. No more abstract top-down party politics. Women have their own councils and self-administration at communal, local, and regional levels. Men have theirs as well, and communication between women's councils and men's councils takes place on an egalitarian basis. Women and men refrain from male-dominated institutions and don't support them any longer. Culturally, women have their own publishing houses, bookstores, and distribution networks. They have their own art galleries, theaters, museums. Women create their own spiritual sites. where they celebrate the earth and life together with their communities. Women and all people of their communities stop further destruction of the environment, the soil, the water bodies, the earth and its plants and animals. In that way, I can imagine new matriarchal communities and societies will quickly arise and flourish. They are truly mother-centered and egalitarian, and modern matriarchal societies could arise. In the given situation, I could not refrain to make a last comment. A short topical comment on the situation of today. If this would happen, what I'm describing here, we would not have such a dangerous war, which is raging today in the Ukraine and is threatening all of Europe. We would have a completely different situation. Therefore, in the end, I would like to close my speech with a slogan from Dutch peace activist feminists, which might well fit to the International Women's Day. Take the toys from the boys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I think it's very, very appropriate for the situation right now. I think a lot of people here will be strongly supporting these ideas in many different ways, but we'll also have a lot of people with some questions about some of your arguments. Does anybody want to start off? Chris, do you want to go first of all?
Well, yes, I thought, sorry, yes, that was absolutely magnificent, Heidi, and so perfect for International Women's Day, and so inspiring, and such a wonderful description of the core common denominator principles of matriarchal societies, and a lovely definition. And I'm very well aware, and I think many of us in the radical anthropology group are very well aware of societies that come very close to matching that definition of yours. And in the chat, we've been mentioning clearly, the Pueblo Indians, the Navajo, and so many others. But just to sort of avoid saying too much, what's kind of fascinating to me was that your conclusion, because you divide sort of along a spatial lines what I think we in RAG have more frequently divided along lines of time. So a wonderful internationalist slogan has always been no borders, no nation states, we're all one. But actually, I've always thought, and I won't go into the details of exactly why, where it all comes from, but we need borders in time. Because if we don't have borders in time, like using the sun and the moon as our clocks and synchronizing our activities, we kind of lack the necessary rituals and solidarity and songs which actually require us to be together doing some things at one time of the month or year and other things at another time. So I'll try and stop kind of quickly, but what was a little bit difficult for me to visualize was the idea that women have their own bookshops, their own theatres, their own sports, their own everything, half the world's economy, and you leave men with the other half. And it just seems to me, it's a beautiful idea. And I think we have had another way of saying the same thing. I think our idea has been take all of it from the men, but don't take all of it from the men all of the time. And so we have this idea of lunarchy, as we've called it, and it comes from what happens with hunter-gatherers in parts of Africa. And Morna Finnegan called it communism in motion, where you take all the power, the women take all the power from men, but allow men to fight back and have their own version of something which might become patriarchy, but doesn't become patriarchy because they're not allowed to do it for too long. And so the idea would be take everything, take the toys from the boys, but just for a little bit of time, as long as it's just play, let them have their toys back, but don't allow them to have their toys for long enough to be able to do any real damage with those toys. So if the other side want to play around with borders and armies and banks and I don't know, all the rest of the complete nonsense, as long as it's just play and they're not allowed to do any of it seriously because we take everything away from them before they can do any damage, that would be closer to what happens among the hunter-gatherers that are genuinely egalitarian, where the women take the power in their rituals, and then they allow the men to take the power just long enough to provide a glimmerings of a threat to the women. So what would happen if we left the men carry on this way? But that precisely provokes the next revolution. And so you get, instead of you've got your matriarchy and it's static, you have this pendulum of power, so that everything's fluid, and men sort of have their say, but all the things they want to do, they're allowed to do only in a playful way, and then everything gets taken from them again. Everything.
I would like to answer to your point that women take half the economy and leave men the half. It was not quite what I said.
All right.
Women take the initiative to create these matriarchal communities, but men are in these communities too, as brothers, as sons, as lovers. Yeah. We have, on the one hand, we have matriarchal communities of all people, women, men, children, but they embrace the same values, which are maternal values, as I exemplified it. On the other side, there are men who want to continue with their patriarchal institutions, and women who want to make their career in patriarchal institutions. Let them there.
I see.
Yes, it's a difference. It's not the difference between men and women, even if it might have sounded like that. It's a difference between matriarchal communities based on maternal values, which are embraced by women and by men. They are together, like in a matriarchal clan where women and men together. And on the other hand, we have these outdated patriarchal institutions with the outdated patriarchal men and the outdated patriarchal women who want to make their career there. This is the point. This is the point. So it's inclusive. When I propose this, of course, it's a feminist basis, but it's inclusive. Matriarchal societies are inclusive, and this matriarchal vision I try to exemplify very short is inclusive. But it is based on a different value set. Patriarchal institutions are based on the value set power and weapons. All power comes from the weapons and so on. Career, being hard and being competitive and so on. This is their value set. But matriarchal communities have a different value set for all people who are in. Yes, so I think it might have been a little misunderstanding. It's not exclusive. Then you are right. Then men would make their revolution and start again and so on. And with the toys from the boys, I found it so funny, this slogan. Boys can have their toys if they want, but boys are not adults. And we hope that matriarchal men are adult and responsible men. That's the difference. And the toys, boys can have their toys, the patriarchal boys, but if the toys become so dangerous as it is today, then it must come to an end. It's too much. It's too much. They have other toys like I don't want to go into details. Let them they're non-dangerous toys, no problem. They have it in their patriarchal institutions. Hierarchy, for example, is a toy for them. They play hierarchy all the day. It's so boring. The other point, Chris, thank you for your mentioning we need borders in time. When I said national states and superpowers are superfluous, I have another model in mind. I think the truly humane unit is the region. We live in regions, and in regions we have borders and we have time. People who live in a special region share a common landscape. They share a common culture. This makes the region. And another region might have another landscape, another culture, and they live side by side peacefully. This is the way how matriarchal societies do it. They have their different regional cultures, but they do not make war on the other culture besides their borders. And I think this is a humane borders in time because it's concrete, not abstract. National states, superpowers, they have abstract borders, an abstract time frame which is too big for humans. We humans are small beings, and we are fitting in a region where we are living from what Mother Earth can give us there. This is the idea here. Region. Region is a political unit, the best one, for transparent politics and a really person-to-person communication and life.
Yeah, I think the idea of bioregion has become quite strong in climate movement politics as well, and I think there's a lot of commonality among many of the sort of climate science and rebels and activists in a lot of what you're suggesting. But when I was advertising this in social media, advertising your talk, Heide, often I got a response from men, intelligent, thoughtful men, who are saying, well, it's just as bad, matriarchy would be just as bad as patriarchy, it doesn't help us. And I tried to explain to them this difference that, you know, men are suffering every bit as much under patriarchy, and they would gain as much under matriarchy as women would. But there is a bit of a stumbling block for so many. I mean, even simply feminism for so many men is seen as so threatening. So to try to explain that is really difficult. I hope you heard that. So it is a big problem. I wonder if there might be some men here who would want to talk. Okay, Manchego, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question about, she mentioned Ian Hodder at the head of this, and Ian Hodder seems to be sort of in denial. And he has transferred that denial to a team that he called, actually he's retired now, but we're still going to talk about him. Yes, a team that he calls the figuring team, all women, 4 of them, who, you know, and they're led by Lynn Meskel. And I'm wondering if you think maybe Ian Hodder's reason for this denial of his has to do with the fact that he's got all these corporate sponsors for everything going on there at the dig and certain interpretations.
Yes, I do not know all of the background, but as far as I know, he was sent to Schutterhüg to do research against the findings of James Mallard. James Mallard clearly showed that this Schutterhüg city, Neolithic city, was women-centered and very peaceful during a long period of time. And this is a difficult result for the academia, the patriarchal institution, universities, and so on and so on. They had to save their patriarchal worldview and send Jan Hodder there that he contradicts or at least diminishes the findings of James Mallard. This is, as far as I know, the background. But please, would you allow me some time to answer to what Camilla Power said? With the matriarchy and the difficulty men have with it. When I started 40 years ago with this topic, mostly women were listening to me, but the situation has changed. I think more and more men see the difficulties and the cracks in this patriarchal castle, this patriarchal fortress, and see the difficulties and the problems for life on Earth. And more men embrace the ideas of matriarchy as I try to explain it to them. Now in the audience, I have at least 1/3 men listening to me, and they are in my study course and so on. You see, it's not a matter of women here and men there. It's a matter of different form of society, which includes both sexes, both genders, all people. And men understand it more and more better. And if you want to have an argument in short, when they say, oh, not matriarchy, it sounds parallel to patriarchy, is the rule of mothers, then you say you are linguistically wrong. For the Greek word arche, arche, has two meanings. One meaning is domination, and one meaning is beginning. You can look at it in a Greek dictionary, you will see that. So I translate the word matriarchy as at the beginning the mothers, which is true for our individual life and might be true also for culture. I think it's true for culture. Meanwhile, patriarchy, you really can translate as domination by the fathers or especially men, some men. You must not follow this. Yeah. And another point why I insist on the term matriarchy is if you use surrogate concepts like matrifocal, matristic, or bilanic, and so on, not everybody understands this and thinks, oh, it's a scientific thing I'm not interested in. But when you say you are talking or you are researching matriarchy, many women some men get enthusiastic and men get upset, and then you have a conversation, and then you can talk with them. You can change their mind. You are involved in this because everybody knows this word, even in the wrong meaning. So I think it's a big advantage.
Yes. Well, that's what I was doing with these guys on social media, because they were obviously intelligent guys, you know. And I'm sure there's plenty here attending tonight. Is there anybody else? There's some nice points in the chat. Does anybody else have questions, comments, please? There was a nice comment on Rojava. Ellen Rosner, did you want to say anything? Because I don't know if Ellen, you want to say anything
on Rojava.
On Rojava, you had.
Well, just to point it out and to ask the speaker, was she familiar with it?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I know. I'm in contact. I had contact with women of Rojava. I wrote 2 articles in their genealogy magazine, and but I think it's very interesting. From Germany, we have a tradition with this topic, with Motherite and Bachhofen, and this was for me the starting point. The women of Rojava had a completely different starting point because they were so suppressed and endangered by the ISS and so on. But I think it doesn't matter when we start from different points. I think in the long run, this will come together. We learn from each other. I respect the Rojava women very much. They put in practice what I envisioned here, what we don't do in Europe at the moment.
No.
I know in South America, a women's village, very interesting. I visited them there. These are practical. These are practical ways to make matriarchal living again. But sometimes when I met women from Rojava, sometimes I have the impression they think they possess the subject matriarchy all alone. That's not true. We have different streams of matriarchy which are coming up today, and this is very good and very important. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Camilla, why don't you just confess that you've been Rojava?
Yes, I had the luck to pay a visit to Rojava in 2019. So this was in the summer before the big Turkish aggression later that year. And I was able to attend some of the women's congresses, the founding congress for the Northeast Syrian region, which was an astonishing event with women of so many different cultural backgrounds, different religions. So people identify Rojava as being Kurdish, but it's not only Kurdish. It includes Arabic, Armenian, Yazidi, many, many groups. And I talked a lot with women in the genealogy committees and the genealogy departments of the university. And it is quite pervasive, the ideas of genealogy, which is like Kurdish matriarchy, Kurdish feminism, the science of women's culture, women's knowledge, if you like. And it's pervasive that all people carrying arms, all people trained to fight, police or soldiers, have to study genealogy. It's like a basic core curriculum in every discipline. And there is nothing very perfect about Rojava because it's a society under war. And if a society is under war, then there will be aspects of patriarchy that raise their terrible heads again. And also, of course, it's a society where women have faced patriarchal cultures for many thousands of years. So there is an enormous battle. But I agree with Heide that it is just phenomenal what has been achieved with a central women's organization in Rojava.
Yes.
Quite astonishing.
Yeah, especially since they're under attack and they're very survival.
Yes.
So it's amazing. That's very interesting. How fortunate that you were actually there.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience.
Yes, it's really great.
Thank you. Yeah,
it's really great what they do there. It's great. It's fascinating. But what makes me very hopeful is that we have a movement in Colombia too, building women's villages. So, for example, Nashira, I visited it there. This is not only one village, this is a movement. And then I learned about a women's village. These women's villages always include sons and brothers and husbands. It's not only
okay.
It's always communities in a matriarchal sense.
Sure.
And I learned the same about a women's village in Congo. I'm not sure if if they are inclusive to men. I don't know at the moment. But what was interesting for me, not in Europe and not in the US, women are eager to implement matriarchal principles. They are doing it in the countries where they are mostly threatened, are mostly poor, where they are the poorest, where the countries are in war or in guerrilla war, like Congo, like Colombia, and like Rojava, Syria. I think there the situation of women becomes so worse that they, that they leave their comfort zone, their comfort in any way. Comfort, I hope is the right word. Here in Europe and the US, we have still too much comfort as women, and we don't become radical, therefore. But anyway, I always say we have to demand half of the economy to change the situation into a matriarchal way. I hope sometime women want to take it up and create a movement.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah, Frederic, yes, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, Heide, I think you've done a fantastic job, a fantastic book, and I do agree with your vision in trying to change and get rid of the toxic, what we call toxic patriarchy. So I don't want to be too in criticizing what you've done, because you've done an enormous amount of work that really, that I want to help and support. But there's one point, there's two things that I disagree with you. First of all, is that I know you explain why you've chosen the word matriarchal society instead of matricentric, which I would have preferred. But the thing is that you imply that real matriarchal society do not exist. And so what are we to do with the real society, real matriarchal society that did exist and were documented in the Chinese annals? And you yourself say in your book, page 93 to 95, that they could not have been imaginary because they're described in such detail. The only thing is that obviously you don't speak Chinese, and accessing Chinese book until recently was extremely hard, even for somebody who does speak Chinese. I do that with the help of my boyfriend who's Chinese, so that's better than just myself. But these Chinese annals, who comprise 43 million words, are all digitalized and rather easy to access. So many more people who speak Chinese could access them if they want to. It hasn't been done because of many different reasons. We don't really have the time to get into that, but you've already mentioned it. Like there's a lot of backlash from the academia, from feminism, from anti-Marxism, for a lot of different reasons. Anyway, the problem about these two real matriarchal societies that were described, you have a few errors in your book. First of all, they were really described from the year 445 to 742 CE, common area, when in your book you said that that was 905 to 581 BCE. So there's like about 1,500 years of difference. And also you kind of try to transform them, because obviously you did not have access to the real text. You just based yourself on what Hermans has published, and he was a missionary, and there's other people. One guy who did really good research was Perliot, the French polyglot. He did a really good research on that. But the people that you, obviously the German scholars that you looked up, maybe didn't do such a good job. Anyway, in Chinese, it is clearly said a number of times that the men were held in lower position. They also say that these two societies, really, there were two, and maybe these two societies were just the leftover of a much larger confederation of tribes, But anyway, they said that they were often at war with their neighbors, with their neighbors, and they sacrificed men or eventually monkeys. So they certainly not were societies of peace, because I have to admit, in their context, if they didn't fight, they would have disappeared. And as a matter of fact, they disappeared in 742 because these societies were not Tibetan societies. They were invaded first by the Tuyuhun and then by the Tibetans, who transformed them into kingdom. This is documented too in the Chinese annal. So, I think it's, what are we going to say? And there are also maybe some advance today in archaeological research with new technology that can prove that there were some other real matriarchal societies. So how are we to name them? That's my problem.
Yes, let me say something to the Chinese annals.
Okay.
The Chinese annals are deeply patriarchal.
Sure.
And yes, deeply. And they describe some of these societies in very strange terms. For example, I visited the Mozo in Western China, which it was for me a crucial test to be there and to look if I'm wrong with my ideas. But it was really confirmed what I said, and we had so kind people who answered to us and confirmed my questions in regard to this definition. And when I tried to do research on the history of the Chinese so-called marginal tribes, which never were marginal, but who were marginalized by the Han Chinese, then I saw that the Chinese annals are so strangely describing these people. For example, this description that men are in a lower position or men are even sacrificed. These are patriarchal ideas which are thrown onto these societies. These societies are never described in a correct way in patriarchal media, be it Chinese annals or be it today in patriarchally influenced internet. So you have to look much more deeper. And I'm not a Chinese expert, but my view was comparison. I compared the societies, and then I found things out which are never written in Chinese annals. For example, it's only an example. So this was a way one way or one method how I tried to find out about matriarchy as egalitarian society. Yes.
But you cannot. I'm sorry. Can I answer, or because Chris has his hand up?
Yeah, just Well, just come back, Frederic, once, and then maybe
Okay,
we'll ask
because-
another.
no,
Go on.
we cannot put our today's mind in patrilineal scribe who were writing 1,500 years ago. They didn't have the same set, they didn't have the same mindset, and they were patriarchal, but they were writing, they were not like Herodotus. Herodotus was writing for a public. The Chinese annals were not written for a public. They were written by scribes to help the emperors write their, understand their empires and control it and rule it. And also, as a matter of fact, the emperors themselves met with some queens. So there's no, and what's interesting, once this queendom became kingdom, some of the kings under the same name, quote, came to pledge allegiance to the Chinese emperor. The emperor never met them. He only met some queens, but he never met the kings after. I don't think we can judge the Chinese annal with today's mindset. I don't want to go any further in Chinese culture, but I think we cannot do that. Their mindset 1,500 years ago was a different mindset from nowadays mindset, even if they were a very patriarchal society.
You see, when I try to find out matriarchal patterns, I always deal with patriarchally sources, always. The Chinese annals are patriarchal sources. Even the most of the books of anthropology which I read are patriarchally influenced sources. I have to read between the lines. And reading between the lines means I must have an example for comparison. But I had not one example, I had several ones. Several. For example, the Iroquois Confederation and their matriarchal patterns are so clearly described since Morgan. So I had examples, and then I could look deeper and read between the lines of all these patriarchal books in anthropology, archaeology, and so on and so on. It's like a detective work you have to do when you want to find it out, because these sources always obscured the matter, distorted the matter, and made it invisible or wrong. Please, I'm sorry to put it so short. I know there would have been too much more to say to the Chinese sources. And let me say one short word about errors. Of course, I think I make errors in details. Of course, I'm not a Chinese expert. I'm not an expert on Indian cultures. I'm not an expert. I'm human. I have my own limits. Yeah? But I don't worry so much about mistakes in detail. It's not my task to describe every culture in detail perfectly. I did what I could, but of course I've made mistakes. My task is to find this definition. What is in common with all these societies? And when I found out the definition, I could recognize others of this type. It's more a philosophical work, a generalizing work, and not a work to be correct in each detail about every culture. So I apologize for my mistakes, but it's not just my task.
Well, thank you very much. I just don't want, we can maybe continue the discussion outside of this.
Yes, we should continue.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be great. Thank you. Bye-bye. Anyway, congratulations for the work still.
Thank you, Frederic. And it's a very interesting controversy in terms of the sources in China and the historic evidence there. And I know that Frederic's work is very interesting. Chris, did you want to come in?
Yes, I can't obviously adjudicate on the material that Frederic is talking about, but I do think both of you got a very important points. I mean, Frederic's point is pretty important, which is that what do you do? What do you call a society which seems to be one where women do have more, I don't know, more status, more sanctity, more place in religion, and more place in the cosmology than men? And I'm just wondering. It seems to me, from my reading, that in Crete and maybe Malta and certain societies, I've just been reading The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Wengrow, they say that it's not impossible that some societies were matriarchies, not in the sense of women brutally ruling over all men, but women having more social and political status and power, judging from the iconography, from the illustrations of the women's position in cosmology and so on. So the question, what do we call those societies, is a valid one. But I also want to say, and now this is just the question of societies which are gender egalitarian and matriarchal in Heide's sense, but viewed through a patriarchal lens. I mean, in my book, Blood Relations, I discuss at some length the fact that every single place in the world, many of them hunter-gatherers like in Australia, but also horticultural societies, wherever men do exercise a monopoly over ritual power, they invariably depict the previous situation of gender egalitarianism as some kind of brutal tyranny of women. They could, because once the men seize power and keep it in a one-sided way, they do need, for ideological reasons, to depict the balanced gender egalitarian society that they've overthrown. They need to scare the boys. They need to scare everybody. If we lose control, if we don't maintain this terrorism over women, and this is what these patriarchal societies do in many places where they have these bull roarer cults and various stuff. If we don't do that, what's going to happen? Women are going to seize power, and the women are going to treat us men the way we've been treating them. Now that's clearly an ideological myth, and I do tend to agree with Heide that something like that may have been going on with these Chinese annals, that the Chinese emperor and others were depicting these egalitarian societies in sort of lurid terms of women sacrificing men, simply because that's what men who become patriarchal and do monopolize power, that really they always do that. They always try to depict the egalitarian societies as female tyrannies.
Yes, I would like to answer your first question. What about societies where women really exercise a lot of power, maybe in religious or political and so on, where they are queens? The traditional culture of the Akan people, they had queens, and they had kings. But as soon as we hear these words, queen and king, we fancy our monarchic ideas, which is completely wrong. This is the same word, but it has in this context a different meaning. For example, the queen in this African culture, she is how I can manage it. She is not a monarch. She is the eldest mother of the eldest clan. She is obliged to her clan. It's a royal clan, but it's not like with Queen Elizabeth in England. No, the royal clan is one clan among the other clans. The clans are equal, but her clan is the most traditional one, who keeps the traditions the longest, or who brought all the clans together to create a new people. Then she is acknowledged as queen, but she is bound back to her clan and responsible to her clan. She is her royal council consists of the clan mothers of all the other clans. Without this royal council, she cannot do anything. Same for the king. The king is her son, her nephew, or her brother, and the king is responsible to the queen, and he is responsible to the men. The clans elect also men as speakers for their clan, and he is responsible to the men's council and can act only together with the men's council. So if we hear the word queen or king in a matriarchal context, you have a completely different structure of the whole society behind, which is completely different from the structure of our societies with queens and kings who are at the top of a hierarchy. You have in this matriarchal queen and kingship, you have a network of relationships among all these people and a mutual responsibility. So the queen, this is much, I think, is much more a position of honor. She's often a sacred queen. The king is often a sacred king, and they are representatives in the most important ceremonies, but very often they have most of the cases, it's always is, it's not only. In all cases, they have no monarchic political power. This is a big difference. Yeah, to put it short in my, I cannot answer to all the other things you brought, because it's so much interesting what you say. I think this needs a lot of comments between you and me, and a lot of discussion. But I want only
just a brief question. Are you saying that it's kind of impossible for women to have the edge of power in relationship to men? To have it, are you saying that a matriarchy in Frederica's sense is just never going to happen? The society, it's impossible to have a society where women have more power than men.
The question is what you mean with power. Women may have more sacred power, which is not political power. She is social. She has no more social power than all the other clan mothers or her whole clan. Maybe she has more sacredness because she is recognized as a sacred queen, but she has not more political power.
Why would all the iconography, all the imagery on the temples and things be very big and very powerful females, and tiny little males offering servitude and giving them gifts and so on? I mean, what would be the explanation for that?
Yes, the explanation is very easy. Sorry, never easy. I try to make it short and easy. What I wanted to say. The sacred queen embodies the goddess. She embodies symbolically the goddess, and the goddess is not more than a male hero. The goddess in matriarchal societies embodies the nature. The nature, of course, is more than a human being. It's a symbolic she is a symbolic representative of the goddess who means whole nature, and the king is a representative of his people, of the human beings. This you can find this very often in matriarchal mythology, this relationship. He represents the people and she represents the nature. The nature is more encompassing than a human being, but nature is not more than a human being. In nature, all are there. Equal is not a good word, but they are equally worth and they are intertwined in many relationships. This is the idea behind it. And you see, the patriarchally influenced anthropologists and archaeologists have so little ideas about spirituality. They don't understand what these people mean in their symbolic spiritual representation. So they have so many misunderstandings. How can a researcher who is a Western patriarchal man has no idea about the completely non-spiritual understand a society which is deeply spiritual and symbolic? I think there is a problem.
Ed, did you want to come in with your question? You had in the chat about the goddess and spiritual. Ed can't hear me. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, yes.
Can you, sorry. Well, I think she might have answered it, actually. Just in terms of these words that she's used about spiritual and a goddess, to me, and maybe I just got, I'm not thinking creatively enough, but to me, they're very disembodied words. And actually, women's power is through the body, it's through sensuality, it's through physicality, and to me, the words the goddess and spiritual to me seem a little bit patriarchal in that they're removing the bodily aspect and the physicality from the women, which is the source of their power. So I just wonder if we need new words, really. If those words have just run their course, then we need new words for these kinds of concepts.
Yes, I understand your point very well. We had this discussion often and often. in women's goddess circles.
Yeah.
You see, sorry, do you want to say?
No, no, go on, Heide.
Yeah, indigenous people never use the word goddess. Yeah? The Iroquois talk about sky woman. Even the old German words about the goddess were Frau Holle, mother, Hulda, and so on, never goddess. But to use today the word goddess has a political aspect. For we women have only heard about God, 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 and always male. So yeah, women in our culture have been damaged by Christianity and the one male God. Huh? So they put as a counterpoint, there existed goddesses everywhere and everywhere. This gave rise to the goddess movement, which is worldwide. But I think we should take this word goddess not as parallel to God, what it is not, because the goddess means the whole nature and the forces, the powers of life, and so on and so on. But to use it is a political feminist point. And therefore, after long thinking about it, I decided to keep the word goddess, to show that to conservative people that not only a male god exists and that he is a historical figure, but also goddesses in the sense which I just described exist. A theologian once say to me, oh, you want to supplement Father God by Mother God in the sky, in the heaven. No, not at all. I said in my talk, in matriarchal societies, divinity is immanent. It means the whole world is goddess, godly, divine. The whole world is divine, seen as a goddess, because these people think the female is the being who brings forth by birth and so on and so on. So they imagine the whole world as divine, feminine, divine, which doesn't make men smaller or lower. No, every living being in this world is divine. Women are divine, men are divine, animals are divine, little flowers are divine, all is divine, all is sacred, because all these appearances are, all this phenomenon are the goddess. It's a completely different concept of goddess than we have in our patriarchal religion. The same with spirituality. I do not want to go into details about the word spirituality. It's the same problem. So I finish now.
Yes. An example of a culture that would fall really readily for matriarchy definition would be the Bayaka from Congo, forest hunter-gatherers, where women have a very bodily, physical aspect of ritual action of dance and song called Ngoku. But Ngoku is a spirit of the forest that they summon from the forest to be part of their dance, and which is the spirit that governs sex and reproduction, particularly. And indeed, they have a mythology that the women used to hold ejengi, which is now men's spirit from the forest. So there is this interaction between the men's spirit and the women's spirit, which keeps going backwards and forwards. But it's a very physical performance, but yet it's summoned and so in relation to the forest, which is itself, it is, as you say, is the immanent divine. It is the giving, the giving parent to the Bayaka people. And again, the example would be with the Bushman, for the girl at first menstruation, who, when she enters her menstrual heart, her body is so strongly identified to the fertility and the fat of the land, and she has to be treated with the greatest of care in relation to the prospect of fertility in the future, of the hunting in the future, and so forth. So it has this very strong integration of physical senses with the idea of the spirit and cosmos and everything. And even though these peoples aren't usually counted into matriarchal societies, I think they're very egalitarian, and they absolutely embody the principles that you say. And as African hunter-gatherers, they are also very, very good models for early human societies. They can teach us a great deal about early human societies as well. One thing I wanted to ask as well, before I ask if there's more questions, is you said something about women in the sort of the very lowest and marginalized groups maintaining matriarchal practices. I think you said something like that. And it makes me think of the Kazi, particularly Indian group, who are very marginalized and not prestigious, but nevertheless strong matriarchal values. Perhaps you'd say a little more about this, that there may be sort of survival of matriarchy in very marginalized groups.
Yes. Yes, you see, according to my definition, which I could develop from knowing some of the societies, when all these features are fulfilled, then I speak of a matriarchal society as a whole. But matriarchal elements are everywhere. We have not many matriarchal societies today in the world, and they are all endangered and damaged in parts. But everywhere you will find matriarchal elements. For example, even in patriarchal societies, special groups have keep matriarchal elements, even if they don't know it or would not label it like that. Mm-hmm. Especially women do it, or marginalized cultures, subcultures. They follow special values which often have an egalitarian background, which I would call maternal values. And when they keep these values, they tend to become matriarchal. Or when you go back in our own mythological and folklore traditions about fairies and nature beings talking and hidden goddesses and so on, you can find so many things even in Europe, everywhere in each country. And these are matriarchal elements. But why could we know about it? We can know about these elements because some groups who believe in that and kept it and remained it, told them the researchers, oh, we believe in this and this and this, in fairies and goddesses, the good mother who is always helping. So we can know about that we had these elements also in Europe, and Europe has a very long patriarchal history, but we also had these elements here. They are even sometimes put into practice, maybe in children plays or in sometimes women came to me and said, oh, I live together with my grandma, with my sisters and my little daughters. We feel like a matriarchal clan. I say, yes, this is a matriarchal element you have in your life. Yeah? They are everywhere. And but I think this would be a huge encyclopedia to find out research areas of matriarchal elements, because they exist everywhere. This shows us that the patriarchal pattern and values and ideas could not suppress this matriarchal substratum, as I call it now, completely. No, they couldn't. They even feed from this still. They sit like parasites. They sit on this huge field below them and feed themselves on this.
Chris, do you want to come in quickly? I want to see if there's any more questions from the chat.
Honestly, two words, Heide. In RAG, we've been very aware of the sun and the moon, and the way in which the moon has, for really powerful evolutionary reasons to do with the menstrual cycle, being connected with women's synchrony and solidarity. And when you get patriarchy, it becomes the rule of the sun god, the sun king, and so on. I'm sure you're aware of that, and you can't say everything in one brief talk, but any comments on lunar and solar periodicity?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I read it in your book, and I fully agree with you. The women had first, I think women in the old in Paleolithic times, they're the first who understood what a cycle is. The cycle of their bodies and the cycle of the moon, and they paralleled this. So I came to the hypothesis that women were the inventors of the moon calendar. Yeah, they invented it, which what we can see in many cultures in the past and also the present, that the moon calendar was kept very, very long, and the moon calendar had to do with the women. This is a very clear connection or blending of two cycles, the women's cycle, menstruation cycle and the moon. And with the sun is a little bit more difficult, for the matriarchal societies were in present and past agricultural societies, and agriculture and seasonal cycle is a sun cycle, not the moon cycle. So the sun was for them also important, but not as a personal cycle or as a calendar. It was a calendar of the year, and they integrated both calendars. And later, when patriarch came up, then the sun was masculinized. Before they had sun goddesses and so on, sun goddesses, for example, Amaterasu of Japan and so on, many sun goddesses and moon goddesses. Later it was torn into part. The sun is male because the sun is always shining as it is eternal, and the moon was female and was made the lower part, which takes its light from the sun. So she is dependent. This is a patriarchal ideology which created then sun gods and a lower moon goddess and so on, all these things.
Thank you. We're on the same page. Great.
Yes, we are on the same page with many things.
I think so. Anybody else with questions? There's been a lot of interesting chat. Does anybody else want to come out of the chat with a question? Some arguments about matriarchal elements in Judaic religion and in Catholic, Virgin Mary, and so forth. I don't know if anybody would like to say something.
Camilla,
or on Indian, or sorry. Go.
Camilla, I'm sorry. I would make I have still a thought I would bring here in this circle about this matriarchy and mothers. You see, in the matriarchal society, the core of kingship is mother, daughter, and son, because fathers don't play a role. This is a point I'm sometimes asked, is it not a contradiction to say matriarchies are egalitarian and mother-centered? Is this not a contradiction in itself? I say no, because the mother is all encompassing being like Mother Earth. But the mother brings forth female and male beings, and these are equal, and these are kept by the encompassing mother. The mother keeps them all together, and for them, daughters and sons are completely equal and equal in birth, even if they are different. This is an idea we have to grasp, because we see mother and motherhood always so narrow and so specialized, but they see motherhood as the all-encompassing capacity which has the universe, the earth, and also the female being, but therefore she is not more than the other. She is only more encompassing, but not more. Yeah, thank you for giving me the time.
Okay. Any other questions? Manchego, you were putting your hand up. Do you want to say anything?
That was sort of by accident, but I was just going to, I was wondering if Heidi was aware of the fact that Frau Halle was invoked by Jewish women in certain ceremonies for naming girls.
No, I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's been a couple papers that came out about that. These have been found in, about 500 years ago or so it started, and it went up. In some places in Germany, it's still practiced. That the Jewish ceremonies do not include girls, and some of these things were actually done. It depends on where you were. And some of these, especially in Poland, some of these things were actually done in the temple, where the girls' names would be written on pieces of paper and put in just like what they were for the boys who were going to be, so that they could be study Torah. And girls were not, were not supposed to study Torah, but their mothers and grandmothers were sort of undercutting that with these ceremonies that were pretty much just women were involved in them, just like just men were involved with the boys.
Yes, thank you. This is very, very interesting. What I know about my studies on Frau Holle is that it was believed that people in remote areas of Germany, where the belief in Frau Holle was very strong, believed in her till to the 18th and partly to the 19th century. They didn't believe in Godfather. They believed in the good mother, which is called Frau Holle. Maybe that some Jewish groups or communities also lived there, and for them it was quite usual to invoke Frau Holle. I don't know. I ask you, but I didn't know about Poland. Frau Holle is not a special goddess of Germany. Frau Holle was a great goddess of whole Central Europe, including Poland, Austria, Switzerland, only under different names. In Bavaria, for example, they call her Percht, but it's the same goddess. And Northern Germany, and she was the most known great goddess of whole Central Europe under different names. But her mythology is everywhere the same. This is very interesting. But thank you for this good idea about Jewish women who are quite interesting. Very, very interesting.
It's fascinating.
Thank you for your talk. This was wonderful.
Great. I think everybody does think so. Was Amajit, did you want to have, Lieta, did you want to come in? Lieta.
I just had, kind of reflections. This was an amazing talk and conversation in the chat, and as ever, but particularly, I would say. And I think this is reflections coming from other things that we've been talking about, and also partly in the chat, sort of how do we implement this in our little, on our little chair from the individual level. And I'm thinking, okay, unpack all these, matriarchal elements that we have. I mean, after, talking about laughing, a book club, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I think in Italy and here as well in Britain, mother-in-law jokes. Mother-in-law jokes cannot exist if mother-in-law is not powerful. I'm sitting here, my living room is full of little witches from the Dolomites. They're beautiful, healing women that are sitting there, and they survive in folklore, as protecting elements, and so we are surrounded by all this stuff. And I think, if we just spend as a little exercise, mental exercise, men and women, unpacking these stories from our chair, from our bedroom, from our kitchen, from our little thing, then maybe we can start, a movement. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes these things feel huge. Oh my God, how are we going to overturn this or make it better or make it? Start on your chair, start looking at what's in your house, start looking at the language that you use and unpack it. And if it is patriarchal, then unpack it as patriarchal and use it differently, and I think this is it. So it's just a reflection on our personal action and responsibility. And thank you, Heide, for this is, amazing intervention. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When I did this research since more than 40 years. I was so much attacked because I use the term matriarchy. And I was asked, why do you use it? Why don't you use a better term? No, we don't use a weaker term. We use a term which is really to the point. If we women and also men use a weaker term, then we make ourselves weak. Yeah? And you brought a very interesting point. When we know what belongs to a matriarchal culture, then we can easily recognize where these elements are everywhere. And we may have a strong point if we name them matriarchal and not like that, like this, like that. Yes, it is matriarchal, and when we name it like that, we can recognize it as matriarchal, and then we can gain back a huge part of our old heritage as women, as matriarchal women, as matriarchal men, and so on. I think this will change our historical perspective completely. Then we are thinking in a new paradigm. I call it a new paradigm. It's important to us. And sometimes women say, oh no, I don't want to use this term, it's so difficult and I'm attacked. I say, yeah, do you want to make yourself weak? Use what it is, reclaim it. Reclaim this term because this term is powerful. Not the women in matriarchy are powerful or the men, but the term is powerful and it is known. And as I said before, you can have very hot discussions if you use this term. I was attacked all the years during my studies. I was defamed, I was excluded from university and all this. It didn't make me weak. It made me more stronger and stronger because always more people, women and men, wanted to know about this topic. So I'm glad to be with you. It makes me also stronger.
You think you've been attacked for using the term matriarchy. Imagine what we face when we use the term lunarchy, ruled by the moon. We have even more attacks, of course.
But you see, these attacks, they are in vain. All things who are new and all things which are new, which are challenging this patriarchal world, you are attacked. It's always the same story.
Sure is. Yeah. I just wanted to ask Amarjit, did you want to say anything regarding India? Because you've got a lot of background.
Oh, there's a lot I'd like to say, but I don't think we have the time. But I would like to say is this, that despite the, these minor details in the book, what I call them, right? I found your book to be very interesting. I find the theoretical, underpinning that you're striving for, to be one of the best. When I started to write about 40 years ago, I defensively used the term mother right. And over the years, I'm now sort of getting near completing part 1 of my volume 1. And I have stuck to the term matriarchy. And I made it very clear that when I use the word, matrifocal or matrilineality or whatever it is, right, I really mean matriarchy.
Yes, you mean it.
That's what I mean. It doesn't matter what term I use. If it's, matrilocal, obviously it's, when the husband is living with the, the wife's family and so on. And regarding the power tend to get shared, not periodically. I mean, in the hunter-gathering society, it might be shared periodically, but the kind of society that I'm dealing with, the power tend to get shared within the clan. It's diffused, but there's more power in certain places than there is others, but you do have access to that power. What I'm trying to say is, it's a little bit more sophisticated than just, men have the power or women have the power. It doesn't work like that at all. I mean, one of the worst patriarchal system in the world that I know of is the Indian caste system. Yes. Yeah, yes. Women, upper caste women share the power with men. That's a fact. We can't get away from that. Upper caste women have physically attacked lower caste women. They have never marched when, there are march about rape of tribal women, Adivasi women, and untouchable women. They've never marched on that. So there are contradictions. It's not a very cut and dried, black and white situation. It's a very, very complex situation. But I think on the whole, I do believe that your approach is right. Where you're heading for, where you're coming from. I believe it to be right, because I'm saying it from my own experience. I'm not academic. I'm not a scholar. I'm looking for the origin of the caste system, and I'm finding that I cannot get away from matriarchy. Doesn't matter how much I tried in the last few decades to get away from this concept. I can't do that. I keep coming back to that. And recently, I've been looking at some of the Hindu myths. I have a book here, which was written by who's the person who was the first Law Minister of India, and he tried to enshrine into the Constitution equal rights for women. And he was met with such hostility, it was unbelievable, from upper caste women.
Yes, of course.
They were very, very hostile to him. They did not want equal rights for women, you see. And he wrote this book called Riddles in Hinduism. And I've been reading it for the last half a decade or so. And there are so many myths. He didn't know anything about matriarchy, but he picked these myths and he said, here is a riddle in here. Here's a contradiction. It doesn't make sense to me. There are two opposites here existing in the same. How come? And of course, nobody's been able to answer those 23 riddles. And I made it my business to do that. And I found that using the matriarchal hypothesis, I was able to answer about 20 of them. So matriarchy has been good for me. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to comment only some of your points. It was very interesting. Of course, when you have a patriarchal society, you have in these different classes also women who belong to the class.
Yes.
And the Indian society is very much stratified in classes and castes. And of course, you have also patriarchalized women who defend their class, even especially if they are in the upper class. These are patriarchalized women. A woman is not by herself matriarchal. They are patriarchally raised, and they will want to defend their privileges and fight against lower class women. Of course, this is patriarchy. But yeah, you say very clearly what it is, and so we have to be careful. It's not. When sometimes I'm asked, yeah, well, what is about women and so on. No, we have to do when we do research on matriarchal societies, we have to do with matriarchal women and matriarchal men. And on the other side, we have to do with patriarchal men and patriarchalized women. And the matriarchal men and matriarchal women show a completely different behavior as women and men in patriarchy. This is different. Men in matriarchal societies are so pro-social and, as I would say, they perform maternal values very clearly, like the women do. This is not, they are raised, they live in these societies all their whole life. They are raised there, they live in their clans, in the maternal clans. They have so much respect for women, and women respect their brothers and sons and so on. It's not a matter of, and for me, it's very interesting to look how matriarchal men behave. It is so interesting how they are and how they manage their masculinity in such a society. It's very interesting. Yeah, only in short of this topic. Let me say something about using this term again. You said it very clearly. When we use the term matrilineal or matrilocal, we refer only to parts. Local, when we say matrilocal, is only the residence rule. When we say matrilineal, it's only the kinship rule. And when we label the whole society as matrilocal or matrilineal, then we take only parts and leave out a huge range of matriarchal features. Therefore, the definition of matriarchy, which I have developed, is comprehensive. It includes kinship, it includes economy, it includes politics, it includes culture, all of this. And I didn't invent it. You see, I found it in my contact with these people. What is very interesting is that some of these indigenous people from which I learned a lot label her traditional society herself matriarchy. The Iroquois say, oh, it was our matriarchy and we want to have it back.
Yeah.
And the Minangkabau people of Sumatra, when you go there and visit them, they are very kind. They are invite you, oh, do you want to come to our society? Do you want to see our matriarchy? Of course, they adopted the word from the Dutch, but
Nice.
the way they live, they call this matriarchy. So why should we European or other people call them matrilineal when they themselves label themselves matriarchy and mean just what I described here? Their economy, their culture, their politics, not only kinship line or residence rule. These are things, I think these are ways of anthropologists trying consciously or subconsciously to belittle these societies and make them smaller as they really are. Therefore, I use the term matriarchy in this definition in this comprehensive way. And this definition is an intellectual tool. It allows us to develop, to recognize these elements of societies also in other parts which have not been researched so far. It helps us. It's an intellectual tool. And it's not about universals, it's not set in stone. If someone tells me, oh, you have forgotten one characteristic, this must be in and the other must be out, it's an operational definition which can be used as a tool and can be refined and elaborate further. This is about this definition. So I'm very glad that you come back to use it, to use this term. For I think when we use a strong term, we make our research strong. And we go on with that, what I think has been obscured, has been belittled, has been distorted. We try to make it, bring it to light again, for it has an element of truth. Not truth in general, but an element of truth.
Getting to very near the end, aren't we, Camilla?
Yes, yeah, I think we got to wind up. Heidi, this has been so clarifying and so lucid and very convincing and absolutely fascinating talk. And not before time. Of course, we really should have had you to speak to us a long time ago, but now at last we're in proper communication. I think everybody here has really appreciated this talk enormously. And it's been so appropriate for International Women's Day to hear it. So thank you so much. We're going to be in touch again close in the future. I'm just going to say something about next week for people before we just say goodbye. Next week, I hesitate to say this because I'm crossing my fingers, but we are actually going to go back into UCL's classroom for next week and the next 2 weeks after that. Next week, I am going to talk on Heide stories. Heide stories about very powerful and monstrous women. Heide being a very, not exactly matrilineal, but matrilocal and pretty matriarchal society, actually. But anyway, I'm going to talk about these Heide narratives, and anybody who can come to the class in London is really welcome. We should be there next Tuesday. But sign up on Eventbrite so that we can confirm the location. In case anything happens, I go down with COVID or something like that, because this is what happened last time when we were hoping to go back. So anyway, that's next week. But it just remains for us. Yeah, Zoom, people are asking Zoom. Zoom, we do Zoom. We always do Zoom, okay? The Zoom will come from UCL. That's what we hope. So Zoom is there, but if you can get there in the flesh, be there. So, okay. Thank you so much, Heidi. I think everybody's saying it's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
Camilla. Thank you, Camilla, and thank you, Chris, for inviting me and being so. Camilla, you were very, how to say it? You were very motivated and very constantly. You invited me constantly, so you succeeded. It's a big success for you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Goodbye. And exactly. Definitely. Goodbye.